Close your eyes for a moment. Breathe slowly. And think about the last time you were chasing something. Not running for exercise or rushing to catch a bus, but chasing in the way that quietly exhausts a person from the inside. Chasing someone's approval. Chasing a version of yourself you thought you were supposed to become. Chasing love that kept moving just slightly out of reach. Chasing a feeling of being enough that somehow never arrived, no matter how much you achieved or how hard you tried. Most of us know it. We have been chasing since we were very young. We were taught early that the good things in life, love, respect, success, happiness, peace, had to be earned. Had to be won. Had to be pursued relentlessly, or they would go to someone more deserving, more driven, more worthy than us. And so we ran. And many of us are still running. Tired in a way that sleep cannot fix. Hungry in a way that achievement cannot satisfy. Searching in a way that finding things never seems to end. The Buddha sat beneath a tree and stopped. Not because he had given up. Not because he had decided nothing mattered. But because he understood something that changed everything. He understood that the very act of chasing was what was creating the distance. That the frantic pursuit of peace was itself the obstacle to peace. That the desperate reaching for wholeness was itself the evidence of a belief that he was not already whole. And in the stopping, in the profound and courageous act of simply ceasing to chase, something that had always been present revealed itself. Not something new. Something ancient. Something that had been there all along, waiting quietly beneath all the running. There is a version of your life that does not begin when you finally catch what you have been chasing. It begins when you stop. When you plant your feet on the ground exactly where you are. When you look not outward at what is just beyond your reach, but inward at what has always been within it. That is where your power lives. Not in what you are pursuing. This is not a teaching about giving up on your dreams or ceasing to grow, or no longer caring about your life. It is a teaching about the quality of energy from which you move through your life. There is a profound difference between a person who moves through the world from a place of inner fullness, choosing what to reach for with clarity and confidence, and a person who moves through the world from a place of inner lack, chasing what they hope will finally make them feel complete. One is growing. The other is running. Today you will walk through 10 lessons about the journey from chasing to growing. From reaching outward in desperation to standing inward in power. Lesson 1. The chasing begins when you forget who you are. The Buddha taught that the deepest suffering comes not from what happens to us but from the story we form about who we are in response to what happens. When painful things occur, and we tell ourselves we are inadequate, so we performed in order to show our worth. There was a young monk named Eklavya who arrived at the monastery burning with ambition. He meditated longer than anyone else. He fasted more strictly. He memorized teachings faster. He was first to every practice and last to leave. The other monks admired his dedication. His teacher watched him with a different kind of attention. One morning the teacher asked him to walk with him to the river. They sat together in silence for a while. Then the teacher asked him a simple question. "What are you trying to prove?" Eklavya was startled. He said, "I am not trying to prove anything. I am trying to grow." The teacher nodded gently and said, "I believe you believe that. But I watch you practice, and I do not see someone growing towards something. I see someone running from something. Those two things can look the same from a distance, but they feel very different from the inside. Which does you recognize?" Eklavya sat with the question for a long time. And slowly, honestly, he recognized the truth in it. He had been running. Running from the memory of a father who called him ordinary. Running from a childhood where ordinary felt like unacceptable. Every achievement in the monastery was not a step towards something. It was a defense against the old verdict. Against the voice that still said quietly in his chest, "You are not enough." The teacher did not ask him to stop working hard. He asked him to find out who he was before the verdict. To sit with himself without the performance, and see what was actually there. And what Eklavya found in that sitting was something he had never expected. Not emptiness, but a quality of presence. Of genuine curiosity. Of warmth toward other living things. It had always been there. He had simply been running too fast to notice it. Begin here. Begin with the honest question of what you are chasing and whether you are chasing it because it genuinely calls to you or because some old part of you believes catching it will finally settle an argument about your worth that should never have begun. Because the moment you remember who you are beneath the running, the chase begins to lose its urgency. And something quieter and more powerful begins to take its place. Lesson 2. Stop chasing approval. Take a slow breath and bring to mind for just a moment the people whose approval you have spent the most energy seeking. A parent perhaps. A teacher. A partner. A community. Even the imagined judgment of strangers whose faces you will never see. Now ask yourself honestly, has the chasing ever worked? Have you ever achieved enough, performed well enough? Approval that is chased is like water carried in cupped hands. By the time you bring it to your lips, it has mostly spilled through. And the act of running with cupped hands only spills it faster. The Buddha saw this pattern with extraordinary clarity. He called it the trap of seeking refuge outside yourself. We look to other people's opinions of us to tell us that we are acceptable, that we are good, that we are worthy of belonging. And because other people's opinions are constantly shifting, constantly colored by their own moods and fears and histories and needs, we are standing our entire sense of self on ground that moves beneath us every time the wind changes. There was a woman named Savitri who had spent the better part of her adult life in quiet but exhausting service to everyone around her. She was helpful. She helped them before they were spoken. She adjusted her opinions to match the room. She softened her edges to fit the space, whatever space she was in. She was beloved by many. And she was utterly invisible to herself. She came to a teacher not because she recognized any of this, but because she had developed a persistent anxiety she could not explain. She had everything she thought she was supposed to want. People liked her. She was useful. She was included. And yet something in her was restless and frightened all the time, like a person who has been holding their breath for so long they have forgotten they are doing it. The teacher listened to her carefully and then asked, "When you are alone, with no one to help and no one to impress, who are you?" Savitri opened her mouth to answer and found nothing there. Not nothing as in emptiness. Nothing as in she genuinely did not know. She had been so thoroughly shaped by the requirements of other people's approval that she had no clear sense of who existed when the requirement was removed. That moment of not knowing was not a failure. It was the beginning. It was the first honest thing she had encountered in years. And from that honest place of not knowing, something genuine could finally begin to grow. Begin to notice where you are making yourself smaller, more agreeable, less visible as a real person with real needs and real opinions, in order to secure a warmth that depends on you never taking up too much space. That warmth is not love. It is comfort. Someone else's comfort, purchased at the cost of your own. And you deserve something far more real than that. You deserve to be known, actually known, and chosen from that knowing. But that can only happen when you stop organizing yourself into something manageable, and start standing in what is actually true. Lesson 3. The present moment is where your power actually lies. Breathe here. Just here. This breath, this moment, this exact place where you are sitting or standing or lying as you read these words. Notice something. Right now, in this actual moment, you are not chasing anything. You are here. And here, if you look honestly, is not as dangerous as the running part of you has always suggested it might be. One of the most consistent features of the chasing life is that it is almost never fully present. The person who is chasing is always mentally somewhere else. Ahead in the future where the thing they want finally exists. Or behind in the past where they are rehearsing what went wrong and how they might correct it. They are everywhere except here. And here, ironically, is the only place where anything real can ever happen. The only place where growth occurs. The only place where power exists. The future is imagination. You can plan for it, but you cannot live in it. The past is memory. You can learn from it, but you cannot change it. The present moment is the only ground that is real. And a person who never stands on real ground never builds anything that lasts. There was a monk named Chandra who had a brilliant restless mind. He was always thinking ahead, planning the next teaching, anticipating the next problem, preparing for conversations that had not yet occurred. He was extraordinary at thinking, and he was completely unable to simply be. His teacher gave him an instruction that he found almost unbearable. For 1 week, he said, every time you notice your mind moving to the future or the past, bring it back to what your hands are doing right now. If you are sweeping, sweep. If you are eating, eat. If you are listening to someone speak, listen as though there is nothing else in the world. Chandra spent the first 3 days in a kind of quiet agony. His mind did not want to stay. It wanted to plan, to prepare, to think several steps ahead, because thinking several steps ahead had always felt like safety. Staying present felt like exposure, like standing in an open field with no cover. But by the 4th day something shifted. He was washing bowls after the morning meal. Simple bowls. Warm water. The sound of it. The weight of the bowl in his hands. And he was completely, entirely there. And in that complete presence something arrived that his endless planning had never produced. A stillness that was not emptiness. A clarity that was not strategy. A sense of his own existence that did not depend on anything he needed to do or become or catch. He went to his teacher that evening and said, I have been so busy preparing to live that I have forgotten to live. The teacher smiled and said, now you can begin. Practice returning to the present moment. Not once dramatically, but 1,000 small times each day. When your mind pulls toward tomorrow's worries or yesterday's regrets, bring it back. Here. This breath. This moment. This is not passive. This is the most active and courageous thing a person can do in a life built around chasing. To stop. To stand still. To be here. And to discover that here contains everything you were running toward. Lesson 4. Comparison is the thief of your own path. Take a breath. And let yourself be honest about something. How much of your inner life is spent measuring yourself against others? Looking at what someone else has achieved, who they are becoming, how quickly they are moving, and using that measurement to evaluate your own worth and progress. This is one of the quietest and most constant forms of chasing. Not chasing a thing. Chasing a position. A relative position where you are ahead of enough people to feel okay about yourself. And the exhausting truth of this kind of chasing is that there is no finish line. Because there is always someone further along. Always someone who got there faster, achieved more, seems to be living the life you imagined for yourself with an ease you cannot understand. The Buddha spoke of this as a particular form of suffering. The suffering of comparison. Because comparison takes you out of your own life entirely, and puts you inside a story about someone else's life. And inside someone else's story you can never win. Because you are not supposed to be in their story. You have your own. There was a young monk named Aryan who had a fellow student named Bodhi. They had entered the monastery at the same time, and from the beginning Bodhi seemed to understand things more quickly, sit longer in meditation, and receive more frequent praise from the teachers. Aryan was not unkind toward Bodhi. But something in him contracted a little every time Bodhi was praised. He began to measure his own progress not by how he felt inwardly, but by how he compared to Bodhi outwardly. And he was always, by that measure, behind. One evening he sat with the eldest teacher, and confessed this with some shame. He expected to be told to work harder. Instead the teacher asked him, when you walk the forest path in the early morning, do you find yourself wishing the trees were taller, the bird song louder, the light different from what it is? Aryan said no, he found the path beautiful exactly as it was. The teacher said, and yet you walk the path of your own life and you find it insufficient because it is not someone else's path. He let that sit. Then he said, Bodhi's gifts are his. Your gifts are yours. The tragedy would be spending so much time watching Bodhi's path that you miss every step of your own. Begin to practice returning to your own path. When you notice comparison arising, do not punish yourself for it. Simply notice it and ask gently, what would I notice about my own journey right now if I stopped watching someone else's? And then look. Really look. At what is growing in you. At what you have moved through. At the specific and unrepeatable quality of your own unfolding. No one else is walking your path. Which means no one else can tell you how far along it you should be. Lesson 5. Stillness is not stagnation, it is where growth begins. Breathe slowly here. And notice if there is any voice that says stillness is laziness, that stopping means falling behind, that the world will move past you if you pause even for a moment. That voice is one of the most powerful voices in the chasing life. And it is lying to you. We have been taught to equate movement with progress and stillness with failure. To always be doing, always be producing, always be working toward the next thing as proof that we are serious about our lives. Rest is something earned after enough doing. Stillness is suspicious, a sign of someone who has given up or does not care enough. But the Buddha's entire teaching emerged from a moment of profound stillness. He sat down. He stopped moving. And in that stopping, understanding arose that 40 years of seeking had not produced. Not because stillness is magic, but because clarity cannot grow in constantly disturbed soil. A pond that is always stirred never becomes clear. A mind that is always chasing never becomes still enough to see what it is actually doing. There was a woman named Revthi who ran a small business, raised 2 children, cared for an aging parent, and had not had a genuinely quiet moment in more than 6 years. She did not notice this at first because the doing had become her identity. Being busy was how she knew she was valuable. Stopping felt like vanishing. Then one season her body made the decision for her. She became ill, nothing dangerous but persistent enough that she was forced to rest for several weeks. She was terrified. She lay in bed watching the world continue without her and waited to feel the disaster she had always imagined stillness would bring. It did not come. What came instead was something she had not expected. In the quiet, things became clear that the noise had been drowning out. She could hear what she actually wanted, separate from what she had been performing wanting. She could feel where she was genuinely tired as opposed to where she simply needed to push through. She could sense which parts of her life were nourishing her, and which parts had been quietly draining her for years without her having the stillness to notice. When she returned to her life, she did not return to the same pace. She built into each day something she now understood was not a luxury but a necessity. Small pockets of genuine stillness. Not planned. Not productive. Just present. And she found that she worked better. Thought more clearly. Loved more fully. Because she was no longer running on the fumes of constant motion. She was drawing from a place that had been allowed to refill. Stillness is where you hear yourself. And you cannot know where to go if you cannot hear yourself. Build into your life the radical and countercultural practice of stopping. Not to become passive, but to become clear. And from clarity, from genuine grounded clarity, your movement forward will be more powerful than anything chasing ever produced. Lesson 6. Needing less from others is gaining everything from yourself. Settle into this breath. And hold this lesson with some gentleness because it touches something that lives in a tender place for most people. We are relational beings. We need each other. Connection is not a weakness. It is one of the most sacred parts of being human. And there is nothing wrong with wanting to be loved, to be seen, to be appreciated by the people in our lives. These are genuine and beautiful human needs. But there is a difference between receiving love that comes and aching perpetually for love that is withheld. Between enjoying appreciation when it is freely offered and depending on it so completely that its absence feels like evidence that you do not exist. Between connection as one of life's great gifts and connection as the external source of an inner stability that should be rooted in yourself. When you need too much from others, the need itself becomes a kind of trap. Because it puts the key to your inner peace in someone else's pocket. And people, even the people who love you most, are inconsistent. They have their own struggles, their own difficult days, their own capacity that runs out sometimes. And when they are unable to give you what you need, if your peace depends entirely on their giving, you are left exposed every time their capacity runs low. There was a monk named Priyanka who had come to the monastery following the end of a relationship that had shattered her. The person she had loved had been the entire architecture of her inner life. What she thought about herself was what he said about her. How she felt about her own value was determined by how valued she felt by him. When the relationship ended, she did not just lose a person. She lost the entire structure that had been holding her sense of self together. She sat with her teacher through months of grief. And what the teacher helped her see slowly over time was not that she had loved too much. It was that she had been living on borrowed ground. That the sense of herself she had experienced in that relationship had felt so rich and real precisely because it was coming from outside, from someone else's seeing of her. But it had not been rooted in her own seeing of herself. And when the source was removed, there was nothing left to stand on. Her work, and it was real work, was to build that ground inside herself. To learn to offer herself the seeing that she had always needed from others. To cultivate the inner relationship that she had always sought outside. It did not happen quickly. But it happened. And what she found at the end of that work was not the cold self-sufficiency she had feared. Not a closing off from needing people at all. But a freedom. A spaciousness. A way of being in relationships that was no longer desperate. She could receive love when it came without clutching at it. She could be without it when it was absent without feeling that she had disappeared. Because she had finally built the one relationship that no one else could give her or take from her. The relationship with herself. Begin to notice where you are placing the key to your peace in someone else's pocket. Not to take it back harshly, but to slowly, gently, begin building inside yourself what you have been seeking outside. Because the version of you that does not need others to constantly confirm your worth is not a colder version. It is a freer one. And from freedom, the love you give and receive becomes something genuine rather than transactional. Lesson 7. Your wounds are not your identity, they are your teachers. Breathe here. And let yourself think for a moment about the things that have hurt you most in your life. The losses. The betrayals. The failures. The moments when the ground gave way and you did not know if you would find solid footing again. Now notice how you hold those things. Do you hold them as part of the story of who you are? Do they live in you as defining evidence of what is possible or not possible for you? Have you organized your sense of yourself around them in ways that are so familiar you have stopped noticing the organizing? Many people who are caught in the pattern of chasing are chasing in response to wounds they have never fully named. The person who cannot stop achieving is often running from a moment when they were told they were not capable. The person who cannot stop seeking love is often running from a moment when love was taken away without explanation. The person who cannot rest is often running from the stillness where an old grief waits to be felt. The wound becomes the engine. And as long as the wound is driving, you are not actually moving towards something. You are moving away from something. And moving away from something is not the same as growing. It just looks like it from the outside. There was a woman named Tapasya who came to a meditation retreat carrying a grief she had been outrunning for 11 years. Her younger brother had died suddenly when she was in her early 20s. She had grieved at the time, or she had done what looked like grieving. But within months she had buried herself in work. She built a successful career. She became extraordinarily competent and extraordinarily busy. She filled every moment with productivity, and every moment of potential stillness with planning. For 11 years this worked. And then she arrived at the retreat, and the silence had nowhere else to go. On the third evening of stillness practice she began to cry. Not gently. The way grief cries when it has been waiting a very long time. She cried for a long time. And when she was finished she sat in the dark and felt something she had not expected. She felt lighter than she had in 11 years. She went to her teacher and described what had happened. Her teacher held the space quietly and then said, "You have been running so hard for so long that you never stopped to pick up what you dropped. The grief was not your enemy. It was waiting for you. It needed to be held before you could put it down. Your wounds are real. They deserve to be honored and felt and moved through. But they are not you. They are things that happened to you. And the difference between those two things, between something that happened to you and something that is you, is one of the most important distinctions in the journey from chasing to growing. When the wound is something that happened to you, it can be held, learned from, and eventually integrated. When it becomes who you are, it drives you. And a wound that is driving your life has far more power than it was ever meant to have. Lesson 8. True confidence grows from the inside out. Take a breath that feels like steadiness. And sit with this honest question. What does confidence feel like from the inside? Not performed confidence. Not the kind you put on in the morning like a coat before going out to face the world. But the kind that does not need to announce itself. The kind that is simply there, quietly, when you need it. Many people who are chasing approval or achievement or external validation are chasing what they believe will eventually produce confidence. If I achieve enough, they think, I will finally feel confident. If enough people approve of me, I will finally feel sure of myself. If I can just reach that level, be seen a certain way, have certain things, then the confidence will come. But confidence that depends on external evidence is not confidence. It is relief. And relief is temporary. It requires constant renewal. The moment the approval stops or the achievement fades or the external evidence changes, the relief evaporates, and the chasing begins again. Real confidence, the kind that lasts and holds up under pressure, does not come from what you have achieved. It comes from a relationship with yourself that is honest and steady. From knowing your values clearly and acting in alignment with them. From meeting difficulty and discovering you have more capacity than you expected. From making mistakes and moving through them without the mistake becoming a verdict on your worth. From being genuinely yourself, not a performance of yourself, and finding that the genuine version is enough. There was a monk named Vikram who was, by every external measure, impressive. He was learned. He was articulate. He was respected by other monks and sought after by students. But those close to him knew something that his outward presentation concealed. He was deeply uncertain of himself. Every teaching he gave was followed by hours of private anxiety about whether it had been good enough. Every piece of praise he received was enjoyed briefly and then doubted. He collected admiration the way a person dying of thirst collects drops of water. It was never enough because the thirst was not for admiration. It was for something that admiration could not provide. His teacher saw this clearly and one day sat with him after a teaching that had gone particularly well and said, "You teach beautifully. But you are still teaching to prove something rather than to give something. Until those two are reversed, you will never feel the confidence you are looking for. Because the confidence you are seeking exists on the other side of a question you have not yet answered. Not am I good enough? But what do I actually believe, and am I living it?" Vikram spent a long time with that question. And slowly his relationship with his own teaching changed. He began to teach not from the need to be received well but from the genuine desire to offer what he understood. And something remarkable happened. The teaching became more alive, more real, more powerful in its effect on the students. Not because he had become more skilled, because he had become more present, more himself, more rooted in what was actually true for him. That is where real confidence comes from. Not from the world's verdict on you. From the steadiness of your relationship with yourself. Lesson 9. Growing requires letting old versions of yourself go. Breathe gently here. And let this truth arrive softly because it can carry some grief alongside the liberation it brings. Growth is not only addition. It is also release. It is the willingness to let go of the version of yourself that the old situation required. The beliefs that kept you safe when you were smaller and more vulnerable. The identity you built to survive circumstances that no longer exist. The story of who you are that was true once and has quietly become a cage. Many people are chasing a version of themselves they were told to become when they were too young to know they had a choice. The responsible one, the successful one, the one who never makes trouble, the one who always has the answer, the one who does not need anything. These identities serve a function when they are formed. They help us navigate relationships and environments where being the full complicated truth of ourselves feels too risky. But we grow. The environment changes. The relationships evolve. And sometimes the identity that once protected us begins to limit us. It tells us we cannot rest because the responsible one never rests. It tells us we cannot ask for help because the capable one never needs it. It tells us we cannot change direction because the person who always has the answer cannot admit they have been going the wrong way. And so we keep chasing the completion of an identity that was never fully ours to begin with. Running toward a version of success that someone else designed for us while the actual calling of our own life waits quietly to be heard. There was a young monk named Suresh who had entered the monastery following his father's wishes. His father had been deeply devoted to the practice, and it was the great dream of his life that his son would follow that path. Suresh had loved his father and honored the wish. He practiced sincerely. He was diligent and respectful and devoted. But after 8 years something in him had gone very quiet in a way that frightened him. He sat in practice and felt nothing. He taught and felt he was performing rather than giving. He helped others and felt hollow rather than fulfilled. He went to the eldest teacher and confessed this with tremendous shame and fear. He expected to be told he was failing his practice. He expected correction. Instead, the teacher asked him a question that opened everything. He asked, "Who would you be if your father had never had a wish for you?" Suresh was silent for a very long time. Then he said slowly, "I think I would still be here. But I think I would be here differently. Not trying to be the monk my father imagined. Just trying to find out what is actually true for me." The teacher said, "Then let your father's monk go gently, with love and gratitude for what it gave you, and begin to find out who is actually here. This is not a lesson about abandoning commitments or discarding what matters. It is a lesson about the courage of honest examination, about asking regularly whether the version of yourself you are working so hard to maintain is genuinely yours, and about having the willingness, when the answer is no, to let that version go with gratitude and begin again from a truer place." Lesson 10. Standing in your power means becoming the source. Come back to your breath one final time. A long breath. One that feels like arrival. Like you have been walking a great distance and have finally come to the place you were walking toward. Throughout these 10 lessons there has been one thread running through all of them. One shift that all of the others point toward. It is this. The move from being someone who receives their sense of self from the outside to being someone who generates it from within. When you are chasing, you are looking to the outside world to give you something you cannot find inside. Approval to tell you that you are acceptable. Achievement to tell you that you are capable. Love to tell you that you are worthy. Belonging to tell you that you are not alone. Comparison to tell you where you stand. These are all forms of the same reaching outward. The same belief, usually unexamined, that the thing you need most is held by something or someone other than yourself. Standing in your power is the reversal of that direction. It is becoming the source. Not of arrogance. Not of self-sufficiency that closes off from others. But of the quiet inner knowing that does not depend on the world's current mood toward you. The rootedness that holds even when the approval disappears, when the achievement is challenged, when the love is temporarily unavailable. The sense of self that is not erected on what you have or what others think but on who you actually are in the private honest moments of your own experience. There was an old monk named Vimalakirti who was known throughout the surrounding region not for any dramatic achievement, but for a quality of presence that people found impossible to fully describe. Those who sat with him felt that something in themselves became more settled, more real. As though his own groundedness had a kind of resonance that touched the groundedness in others. Students came from many places and asked him the same question in different forms. How do I find peace? How do I stop feeling at the mercy of everything? How do I become someone who is not shaken by every change in the weather? His answer was always some version of the same thing. He would say, "You are looking for something that is already inside you. Not something you need to build or earn or achieve. Something you need to uncover. The chasing is covering it. The needing is covering it. The performance is covering it. Become very still. Become very honest. And look at what has always been underneath all of that." One young student pressed him. She said, "But how do I know when I have found it? How will I recognize it?" He thought for a moment. Then he said, "You will recognize it the way you recognize coming home after a very long journey. Not because it is new. Because it is familiar. Because some part of you has always known it was there. You have simply been away from it for a long time. That is what becoming the source feels like. Not like gaining something you never had. Like returning to something you always were before the chasing began. Before the needing. Before the performance. Before you learned to look outside for what has always existed within. That is your power. It was never in what you were chasing. It has always been here. In the stillness. In the honest self. In the person who exists when there is nothing to prove and no one to become, and nothing to catch. That person is enough. That person has always been enough. And when you truly know that, from the inside, in your bones, the chasing simply ends. Not with a dramatic decision. Just with the quiet recognition that you have been running from a home you were standing in all along. Breathe here. And notice how you feel right now. In this moment. Having walked through these 10 lessons that are really one lesson expressed in 10 different voices. The lesson is this. You are not a project to be completed. You are not a race to be won. You are not a destination to be reached by chasing harder or running faster or wanting more fiercely than you already do. You are a living being with a specific and unrepeatable nature. And that nature, tended honestly, given the space to grow rather than just perform, is the most powerful thing you will ever have access to. The Buddha did not become free by chasing freedom. He became free by stopping. By sitting down in the middle of his own life and becoming so present, so honest, so utterly still, that everything that was not real fell away. And what remained when the chasing stopped was not emptiness. It was everything. It was clarity. It was the kind of peace that does not need circumstances to be a certain way. The kind of strength that does not depend on what the world is currently willing to give. That is available to you. Not in the future when you have finally caught what you are running after. Now. Here. In the life you are actually living with all its imperfections and incompleteness and beautiful, ordinary moments of genuine presence. Stop chasing. Not because your dreams do not matter. Because you matter more than the chase. Because what grows in you when you stop running is worth infinitely more than anything you could ever catch. Plant your feet. Take a breath. Look around at the life you are already in. And begin, from here, to grow.